I want to spend a few moments remembering a woman's gift to Jesus. It's recorded in Matthew 26, and that's where I'm going to be for a few moments today, but it is recorded in all four of the Gospels. Now, in Matthew and Mark, we don't get her name at all. In Luke, she is called a quote-unquote sinner. And in John, she is referred to as the sister of Martha and Lazarus, which means that her name would be Mary. Rachel Held Evans says this about these accounts. Whether these accounts represent one event, or two, or possibly even three, has been the subject of speculation for centuries. It's easy to get frustrated with the writers of Scripture, who are so careful to name and distinguish the 12, but who so often blur the women together. The Scholars Version, note to Mark 14, verses 3 through 9, says, "It must be unintentional irony when Mark has Jesus predict that this story will always be told in memory of a woman whose very name escapes him." So we don't get her actual ID. But for our purposes today, that's going to be less important than what she did, and I think that's how she would want it too. This event happens in the home of Simon the leper, and he's having a meal to honor Jesus. And there's this dichotomy going on in that on the one hand, Jesus is the guest of honor by a thankful host, Simon the leper, who most likely was healed by Jesus, and he's showing gratitude for that. But in the preceding verses, the religious people, the chief priests and the elders, are gathering and they're scheming to try to find a way to arrest Jesus and kill him. And in the middle of all that, here this woman enters the picture carrying an alabaster jar of perfume, which means that the container is very expensive and the contents are very expensive, and she pours out the perfume on Jesus' head and wipes his feet with her hair. And there's this great Steve Green song, and this is a few years back, but it's called Broken and Spilled Out. I would encourage you to find it on YouTube if you haven't heard it before. There were obviously reactions to this woman's gift. Predictably, the disciples criticized her, saying, "Why didn't we sell this and give the money to the poor?" They seemed to know how best to use this money. But this woman wanted to give all the contents and all of the value to Jesus. And not to overlook this detail, but in one of the other Gospels, we discover that Judas was the one who offered the objection because he was the one who handled the money. He was the treasurer. And on occasion, he would help himself to the contents of the purse. Giving to the poor is not a bad thing. No one would say that it is, and we need to be doing this. But one of the criticisms toward the church, in my experience, is how it spends its money. Churches who renovate their buildings on occasion can be criticized for this. I'm leading our church through this process right now. I think it's an important and necessary thing for us to do to maintain our facilities and help them look as good as they can. I don't consider that to be an extravagance, but a necessary expense. But it is, in fact, expensive. Churches can spend large sums of money on buildings, and that can be a target for criticism. But the other thing that comes to mind is when people are criticized for being generous in their contributions to the church too. This happened years ago. I recall a man who had given his life to the church, and when he died, he left a large sum of money to the church. But his children, who did not share his commitment to the church, they complained about it. And when they learned about it, they contacted me and told me they didn't appreciate it, and they were upset with me and our church for receiving this money. And my thinking was that if the man had wanted his children to have this amount of money, he would have left it with them. But based on their reactions, I got the impression and a glimpse into why possibly he did what he did. Not everyone understands this level of generosity. Question it when we spend a lot of money to go on vacations or buy new cars or clothes, but when it comes to the church, then just don't do so generously. The issue with the woman's gift was not that she gave to Jesus, but how much she gave to Jesus. The implication by the disciples was that she didn't understand the value of her gift, but I would argue that she did. And she was overcome with thanks for what Jesus had done in her life. And her thinking was that if she didn't do it now, she would miss the opportunity forever. And for her, it was an act of worship. And the disciples were not tuned into the moment and what was going on with Jesus. They were simply focused on the perfume and how much it was worth. But her gift was sacrificial, it was costly and extravagant. And again, it wasn't the gift, but the size of the gift that the disciples opposed. Hannah Weidman says this, "If there's one thing I love, it's the unexpected gift, whether given or received. I felt the exhilaration and freedom when giving things away, things with real value. But extravagant and unexpected giving rarely comes from a place of natural generosity. There's a supernatural grace at work, I know this grace because I've spent most of my suffering with the scarcity mindset, the idea that there's not enough to go around and I'd be better off socking what I have away for another time. When I read the account of the woman days before the crucifixion of Jesus, my spirit swells with yes, but I confess and cringe as I do so that my flesh still has the same response as those who were in the room, and I scrutinized the extravagance. The disciples were scrutinizing this woman even as the aroma of what she had done had filled the room. The aroma had to be pretty strong in that place. And it's incredibly meaningful to me, and especially being mindful of that culture and the courage she had to do this. And in the gospel accounts, there's no record of her saying anything when she did this. She didn't care what the others thought or said about her, and she didn't defend herself at all. But notably, Jesus did. Jesus didn't say what maybe many of us would say when we are presented an unexpected gift. Usually the default answer is, oh, you shouldn't have. And I have to say, I've raised 3 children, and I've never heard any one of them say something like that when we would give them a gift. Jesus' response to the disciples was stop bothering this woman, and notably, the word for bothering is the word for bullying. They were verbally abusive to this woman in that moment, and Jesus put a stop to it. Jesus said, she's done a beautiful thing for me, and the poor you'll always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you won't always have me. How could this level of generosity and love be going on towards Jesus while at the same time religious people are scheming on how to kill Jesus? This was a time-sensitive gift. Jesus was on his way to the cross, and what that tells me is that some things simply can't wait for another time. We have to do it in the moment, or we will lose the moment and the opportunity, and we won't have it again. What we do for Jesus is going to be remembered. Deep-sea divers found a leather case of 40 small vials of perfume in the wreck of the Titanic. These little bottles would have been sold in New York City, and they belonged to a businessman from England. When pulled from the water, the fragrance of the oils filled the air after almost a century. One of the experts in the retrieval of artifacts said, to smell something that smells the same as it did on the Titanic when it went down is simply incredible. Of the 5 senses, smell is the most powerful, and it is associated with memories. It can be associated with the memories of a person or a place or a time. The smell or the aroma of something can take us back to a place and to a situation. I mean, flowers are like this. We can smell them before we see them. The aroma of this woman's perfume dripping off of Jesus' head and his hair and his beard lingers in all 4 of the Gospels. And the echo of that criticism remains too. Why this waste? I'm curious, was the aroma noticeable when Jesus stood before Pilate, when he was betrayed by Judas? Did the soldiers notice it as they nailed him to the cross? The aroma of that smell is still being talked about today. We do a lot of things to remember people. We build statues, we have plaques, and we do memorials and scholarships. It is important to remember. Jesus said, truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is told, what she has done will be told in memory of her. This nameless woman in the gospel account, we remember what she did, but we don't remember who she was, and we can argue about why we don't know, but I went back to the sentiment in our time frame. I mean, we can get a lot more done if we don't care who gets credit for it. We're pretty good about knowing how someone else should spend their money and their time or their resources. But the issue is not to complain about someone else's doing or not doing, but to focus on what we have in that moment and what we're doing. This woman showed extraordinary gratitude towards Jesus, and he did not rebuke her for it, but he received it. So in that context, if we want to see generosity, then we need to be generous. We need to be the change that we want to see in others. Evans says once again, we can't know for sure whether the woman who anointed Jesus saw her actions as a prelude to her teacher's upcoming death and burial. But I suspect she knew instinctively the way that women know these things, that a man who dines at a leper's house, who allows a woman to touch him with her hair, who rebukes Pharisees and befriends prostitutes, would not survive long in the world in which she lived. In our culture and in our experience, there may be those occasions when you are serving the Lord and the people around you don't understand it. And they may even criticize you and question why you're spending your time or your energy or your money in this way. Essentially, they're criticizing the moment and saying, why this waste? There are some people in life who like to do things, and there are still other people who like to comment and criticize what those same people are doing. Just like what happened in that room when it was filled with the aroma of an incredibly costly gift from a nameless woman who was anointing Jesus for his burial. This woman in that moment, in that culture, did something we still talk about today. She didn't set out to be remembered. She simply wanted to show gratitude to Jesus with the best and most valuable possession that she had, and she broke it. And she wasn't careful in doing it at all. She was reckless to a fault for Jesus. And what Jesus did for us was even more costly and even more sacrificial, too. Thanks for listening.